Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese here with my co-host Nick Olson. Nick, how are we doing today?
Doing good. We missed you guys last week. Sorry with the Damar Hamlin situation and with the Packers blowout, we weren't necessarily feeling like we did grind the All-22, we promised, but just didn't really feel like getting the pod up off the ground last weekend. So we do apologize for the hiatus and the lack of communication there. Did get some DMs from folks being like, "What the heck, Nick? Where are you guys?" So yeah, we got a jam-packed episode this week. We're gonna briefly touch on the Packers debacle. We're going to hit the Bears JV squad that the Vikings demolished.
Yeah.
Finally got another double score win. Just happened to be against a team of backups, pretty much. And we're going to really dive into this upcoming playoff football game because we're excited to have the season end in a playoff run, starting with this Giants team that we saw just a few weeks ago. So excited to get in it with you with Matt. How are you doing, Matt?
Yeah, I'm doing well, obviously, and I want to touch on it at least a little bit. The Damar Hamlin situation, it sounds like he's doing very well in terms of his recovery. That's good news for all of us. Obviously, with the magnitude of that, it was kind of hard for me to get into football, and I'll be honest, I did not grind the Packers tape last week. I mean, I watched the full game,
Shame.
but
Shame.
I just could not get myself through that all 22 last week, especially after that situation. It was definitely a down week, and I still kind of feel a little bit cautious about football moving forward, right, with that happening. But we've kind of gotten back into the swing of things. The media cycle has kind of taken its toll, and it does look like very positive news for Damar Hamlin, so that's a really good sign. And it's kind of hard to transition from that, right? But I think we are going to get into the football game here. And we got, the game against the Packers, game against the Bears. We're going to go kind of short on both of them simply because, as you said, the Packers game, I mean, that's just a burn the tape situation. And the Bears game, that's really against, the backups were in for half the game. I think Chris Reed was the most notable thing we want to take away from that game, just that he was able to get the snap counts right this time. But at least for the Vikings playoff chances, right? And then we'll get into a really deep dive into the Packers. I'm pretty excited for what we have for I'm sorry, for the
The
Giants
Giants.
game in the wild card round this weekend. So Packers first. I mean, I have two notes, right? It's wear the right cleats, you idiots. Like, come on. Like,
Basic stuff.
it's not that hard. There were Packers fans online. Like I know Luke Braun was all over the Lockdown Vikings was all over the wear the right cleats thing, and there were Packers fans responding to him as if he was making an excuse for why the Vikings lost. No, he was mad at the pack. He was mad at the Vikings players. We're all mad at the Vikings players for just slipping all up and down that field. That ruined like 5 plays in the first half, right? And by the end of the first half, the game was completely out of hand. And those plays are drive killers when you ruin plays like that. Secondarily, Chris Reed not knowing the snap counts as the backup center for this game was a disaster. Now, I mentioned it seems like that got fixed against the Bears, and it was a difficult environment in Lambeau Field, right, with the snap count and stuff. But that also ruined 5 plays. I don't think the team had any chance of getting off the ground with probably, at least a third of their plays in the first half of that football game being complete nothing burgers because players were falling down or they couldn't get the snap off. And I really think that's the story of the game from the Vikings perspective. Obviously, the Packers really showed up to play, had a lot of energy, did that. The Vikings didn't really show up to play. You have the kickoff return touchdown, which was another debacle, right? Like the coverage on that was just atrocious. Jalen Naylor, who we're going to praise a lot on this episode, was entirely out of his path on that special teams play. Like it was really just a disastrous play from the kickoff coverage. But, outside of that, anything you want to touch on in the Packers game, Nick?
It was a frustrating effort from the offense. I mean, you mentioned guys, falling over on routes. I mean, the pick six happened on a route that Justin
Mm-hmm.
Jefferson fell over on, and he was falling over on multiple routes. And it wasn't just him; it was guys, it was other receivers, it was guys on defense, it was missed tackles, it created missed tackles, yards after the catch, yards after contact, and stuff. So just very basic equipment errors, guys.
Yeah.
Very fundamental, like this is high school stuff. Like wear the right shoes for the game, guys. Um, Other than that, Chris Reed, this was a game that you never want to be in a situation going into a game with your raw backup guard as your third string center forced in because your backup, Austin Schlottman, is on IR all of a sudden. So that's a bad situation to be in. Chris Reed did not know the snap count where there were false starts entirely on the center because everybody moved except for Reed. There were snaps that were high, that were low. You get worried about like that fundamental stuff. And Kirk did a good job salvaging a couple things, botched snaps that he recovered, plays that he was able to or bad snaps that he was able to sort of get away with. Hopefully that won't be a concern heading into this playoff game because Bradbury was a limited participant, so maybe it's all a moot point. But in any case, he showed, I think, some pretty substantial improvement in the Bears, both in knowing what he was doing out there at center and also blocking effectively after he had successfully transferred the ball to the quarterbacks or the running back. And I guess it was a blowout in a bad one for the Vikings. That said, the a lot of it doesn't necessarily concern me long term. Like giving off the kickoff return touchdown was just like, guys, respect your run, respect your lane in
Hmm.
kickoff coverage. Like Jalen Naylor just. I have no idea what he's doing. I mean, fans have probably seen the all 22 angle of Naylor, but Naylor just abandons his running lane entirely. And so does basically everybody on the left side. Like they're just completely ineffectual. And I understand it's outdoors, it's cold, so I understand if the kicker can't get it all the way into the end zone for a touchback in those circumstances. But you have to respect Nixon as a returner. He's a really good returner. He was due for a kickoff return touchdown. But that's just the coach needs to get back and tell guys like
Yeah.
do your job. You have one job. It's to occupy this lane. Don't freelance when you get down there for to create a splash play or something. Just fill your gap. It's kind of like run defense, really. Just fill your gap and stop your guy. But like the pick six, some of the interceptions. The Vikings. I think one of the reasons the Vikings tend to get blown out in their losses is because when things get bad, they don't want to just like settle for field goals. They don't want to just settle for like we'll end up with like a respectable like
Hmm.
20-10 loss. Like no, they're gonna go for it on fourth downs. They're gonna try and get touchdowns. They're gonna try and get explosives. And so you saw Kirk kind of pushing the ball down the field a little bit, and that resulted in he had 3 interceptions in this game. Not often you see Kirk with 3 interceptions. So I mean that kind of thing, I don't worry as that as much, and I feel like that's the right process you want to be playing. Like we want to get back in this game, and you want to see some aggression. They went for it multiple times on fourth downs in the game. So I mean, things like that don't concern me as much. Um, Defensively, it was not great, but it wasn't like, um, it wasn't like atrocious. And I feel like a lot of the points given up were like, well, they had 3 interceptions, and they had bad kickoff coverage too. So and punt coverage wasn't great either. So you add all that in, and basically it's always awful starting field position. And the Packers are, you have to tip their cap to them too. They kick ass as a run blocking team. They're hard to. They get a lot of Aaron Jones and they get a lot of extra yards after contact, and they create extra yards. And Rodgers is still really good, and Watson has come on a little bit, and we saw them both kind of have good games. So all that said, like it's a bad game. I don't totally burn the tape, but I do feel like I don't expect the Vikings to give up more kickoff return touchdowns. I don't expect Kirk Cousins to throw 3 picks, including a pick six. So there's things to clean up there, but it's not like wow, the Vikings are absolutely fraudulent. I should probably talk a little bit about how they shut down Justin Jefferson. It wasn't one thing, but it was a lot of what we've seen from smarter teams all year, where they basically play halves to Jefferson's side all game, and then that's kind of results in a soft double team. You did see some true double teams, some true bracket coverage, and the big thing for the Packers is they were trying to jam Justin Jefferson, or at least play aggressive soft, like not physical jam, referring to get your hands on him, or basically just press coverage where you sort of back shoe out of your press technique, and that way basically always have somebody in the immediate vicinity of Jefferson. Throw him off his timing if you can. If you're not going to do a hard jam, there were some situations where it was cover one. Jair is not going to jam necessarily in that situation because Jefferson is really good against press. The reason this works is that because you have a safety help over the top. Jefferson's really good
Yes.
at beating jams. He's really good at beating press. But if you have a safety over the top, then it turns into bracket coverage when Jefferson kind of gets downfield on those dig routes or those post routes or whatever else he's going to do downfield. So that really limits what Jefferson's able to do. That forced the game to be like a TJ Hawkinson, KJ Osborne game. And they're good players, but they're not Justin Jefferson, and that's why teams do it. So that is something the Vikings kind of have to figure out how they're going to beat that going forward. I don't think that's super relevant for the Giants because that's not the brand of defense that the Giants play. They're a man coverage across the board, blitz all the time defense. They are not a Fangio style cover two, cover six, cover eight type team. That's the one thing I would say is like what the hell happened with Justin Jefferson getting one kind of catch for 17 yards or whatever it was when he was on track for JJ2K, Jair Alexander gritting in his face. It's a little. I mean, Jair's really good. He played well. Part of it was, I think, the offense was just kind of like, okay, you want to devote all that attention to Kirk. We also have a Pro Bowl tight end. We also have KJ Osborne. We also have Adam Thielen, and they were happy to just feed those mouths. So. But to the extent the Vikings advance in the playoffs, see the 49ers or whatever, I feel like that's gonna be something they have to address. But that's kind of all I have. That's everything I would Packers game. The rest I think is yeah, you can burn it. You don't necessarily need to deep dive it. So
Yeah, I agree. And the one thing I wanted to pull out there that I think is a pretty good point by you is, yes, this game got out of hand. Yes, the Cowboys game got out of hand earlier, but I think the Vikings' willingness to be aggressive is what has enabled them to come back in some of these games. Like, obviously, the Colts being an example, right? They're not laying down, they're being aggressive. They're trying to score points and come back. And yeah, maybe it's embarrassing and they get blown out by 40, right? But I'd rather have them have that mentality, especially when it comes to the playoffs, right? Is every game is do or die, so you need to try to come back. So that's fine by me. The next thing we have on the docket here, obviously, is a win against a JV team in the Bears, right? They maybe they were trying their best, but the players they were trotting out there were not, NFL starter level players. The Vikings offense kind of went through that defense like a knife through hot butter. I don't believe we punted until late in like the fourth quarter or something when the backups came in. We obviously did have a couple miscues with a fumble and a missed and an interception that Nick Mullins threw. We obviously had the miscue at the end of the half, the game management miscue where we couldn't get the kickoff, or we had 12 men on the field because it was a scramble to get the kickoff. But what I wanted to cover from this game is just kind of players who stood out from the game. And I think the first one is KJ Osborne, right? He's the only starter I have on the list. Obviously, he had like 100 plus yards on 5 catches. I think he had a touchdown as well. Opening drive of the game had a really big... Was that the opening drive? I think it was. Had a really big 66-yard reception that almost went for a touchdown. Obviously, that was busted coverage, but he really has shown over the last handful of weeks that I think he's a secondary wide receiver, or at least he's a very valid receiving target opposite Justin Jefferson, maybe overtaking Adam Thielen a little bit. Just could you comment on Thielen versus Osborne? I know it's been a hot topic. I think either can play a role where they're a pretty decently large part of the offense, and I don't think it matters too much. Do you have a preference of one of the over the other, Nick?
they're different kinds of receivers. I feel like Thielen is still really valuable. I don't want to jump on a hot take right now and say like Osborne has supplanted Thielen as the wide receiver
Mm-hmm.
too. I do think long term Osborne is capable of being a very good second receiver in the league, and I think you've really seen him come into his own, especially in the second half of this season. I feel like, I've talked about this before. The main things I scout when I study receivers are: do they get open before the catch? How are they at the catch point, and how are they after the catch? And KJ Osborne's really shown, I think, improvement in all 3 phases. His releases are much more sudden, and he's quick. He's not. He's never going to be Tyreek Hill off the line of scrimmage. He's not that kind of athlete, but there's no wasted footwork in his releases anymore. It feels like he's been working a lot with Justin Jefferson because
Mm-hmm.
you see him. He has so many first down receptions on third down, so many third down targets, and he sees a lot of that press coverage on third down, and he's just immediately able to establish leverage, stack a receiver, get the way he wants to go, and basically set himself in good position. And then he's also gotten his footwork's gotten cleaner so that he's able to separate cleanly out of his breaks. I don't think he's ever going to necessarily be, like a, break guys' ankles and juke them out of their shoes type of receiver because that's not the kind of athlete he is. But he is able to sort of make very clean breaks. And he's very precise and consistent in his routes. And I feel like that improvement in his route running is the number one thing that's led me to believe, like, okay, this isn't just a tertiary guy. This is a guy you can rely on. And I feel like Kirk has really started to rely on him too. I mean, yeah, that on top of everything else he does as a blocker. Alec Lewis at the Athletic had a great piece today come out on KG Osborne, and basically everything he does in the sort of Cooper Cup role where he's aligned like a tight end, so
Mm-hmm.
close to the line of scrimmage. He does a lot of that dirty work, but he's also, just like a very complete receiver. I mentioned, not just being what he does before the catch, but at the catch point, he doesn't have a single drop this season. He's one of three receivers, the second most. The only receiver with more catches without a drop is Keenan Allen. So KJ Osborne is, he's the second most. He has like 60 catches on the year. So that's really impressive. There's only three that have 50 catches and no drops, and Osborne is one of them this year. So that's pretty impressive from him. And then after the catch,
Yeah.
you saw this game. You saw those punt return skills where he catches a ball in the flat and is able to just stop on a dime, and a defender runs past him, and then he's able to plow forward. He's got good inertia, I guess. He'll lower his shoulder into contact and carry guys forward too. So I feel like he's really come along. In terms of comparing him to Adam Thielen, I think Thielen is still the better downfield threat, and I feel like Thielen is a lot. I don't want to fall into tropes, but he's a lot craftier in terms of like arm bars or separating late or showing late hands, tracking the ball well, and I feel like he's still a very good vertical threat. Thielen's never been sort of you watch him like run a blaze out, or you watch him run like a whip route. You see a lot of whip routes in this offense, and that's never been Thielen's route where he's able to sort of like turn his hips really fast. And I feel like that's probably where he's shown his age the most. Is he doesn't really. It's like a battle cruiser trying to turn as opposed to like a little sloop or whatever. To use a nautical analogy, Thielen's, he's not as quick on those pivot routes, those whip routes. So
Sure.
I feel like that's where you see a little bit of a slowdown. That's where I think KJ Osborne has an advantage, being almost a decade younger. So I feel like they both can be important components of the offense going forward. I feel like long term, Thielen is probably growing along in the tooth, and you want to start thinking about his long term replacement this offseason. But you also feel a lot more confident in everything KJ Osborne's done. Not just because he does it against this Bears defense, but because he's done it week in and week out on pivotal downs, on third downs, on fourth downs. He's become kind of a go-to guy. And I think for all those things that I've mentioned, all those traits, all those things he's showing on film, I'm starting to believe in him, not just as like just a guy, but as somebody who can be a positive contributor. And I'll say, just to end my monologue, I feel like everything you read about him shows that he's the absolute right character guy. Like I feel like that's kind of why
Yeah.
Spielman drafted in the first place. Team captain at both was he at Miami, and then I
Buffalo and
forget
Miami.
Buffalo and Miami is captain at both places, and he's kind of a first in last out kind of guy, and just does all the right thing, has all the right work effort, knows exactly what he needs to work on too. You pair that with Keenan McCardle, I feel like he's still got some upside to grow into as a young receiver, so I'm excited to see him continue to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. His development's been exciting. I thought maybe we thought at the beginning of the year he might have a little bigger role than he has, but he really has kind of come into that role we thought he might be able to have at these last few games here. So next player I have on the list who is kind of the end of the players who we might see in the playoffs, I have a feeling, is Kairis Tonga, right? He's been a rotational nose tackle for us on the defensive line for a number of weeks now, and I think he's playing at a really high level. Obviously, he also, in addition to Duke Shelley, had a revenge game against the Bears this last week. He made 3 or 4 pretty impressive plays in the backfield, just kind of dominating the Bears center. And I forget his name, but he's not great, right? Is it Sam Mustipher as their center, or is that an old name that I'm remembering?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, yeah, Sam Mustipher obviously did not play particularly well. Kairis Tonga kind of dominated him on the day, and really just his strength and ability to hold up against double teams is something that has shown up. His ability to disengage from single blockers is something that we saw in this game, and that's kind of a lock, peek, shed technique that he uses, that our entire defensive line kind of uses as part of this gap and a half kind of defense, and I think it's worked really well. Like he, along with Dalvin Tomlinson and Harrison Phillips, do a great job of keeping the linebackers clean when they're in the football game on a general level, and that's very important because the Vikings love to play a man down on defense. I just charted the entire Giants game, right? Kairis Tonga got pretty significant reps in that game as well, but on like all run snaps but 1 or 2, and so that's like 90% of plays the Vikings were a man down in the box, or they had an equal number of defenders in the box to a number of blockers that were in the box, which basically leaves the RB free. So you need guys who can take on double teams to do that sort of thing. He's also had some pass deflections and stuff over the course of the season, so I've just liked what I've seen from Kairis Tonga. I think he's a strong rotational player. Obviously, I don't think he's going to overtake Dalvin Tomlinson or Harrison Phillips as the starter necessarily, but those are big guys and they need breaks, so I love what he's been able to do for us.
Yeah, he's a beast. I mean, he had a run stop on 3rd and 1 where the Bears, it wasn't his run stop, but he just walked the center back a yard or 2 yards
Hmm.
back immediately off the snap, and he knocked the running back
Yes.
with the center. He didn't quite tackle him with the center, but he knocked him back, and that allowed Kendricks and Hunter to rally to the ball carrier and get the stop on 3rd down. He does that every play, and it's not just. In those short yardage situations, he will get penetration. He will, it's funny, with all the proliferation of the zone, Shanahan, McVay offenses, you see a lot of these undersized centers, and they're just toast against a guy like Tonga because he's so strong, and he will walk guys back. But he's also that strength also, and the balance and the technique. He's really able to sustain himself against double teams to keep linebackers free. He's been I don't want to say transformational, but him coming into his own as a nose guard in this offense and allowing Dalvin Tomlinson and Harrison Phillips to play 3 or 4 eye techniques and bear fronts or odd fronts or whatever we're doing has really unlocked this team, this defense. And I feel like, or at least the run fits in the second half of the year. Really impressive stuff. Really excited to see him coming along. I mean, he's under team control for another 2-3 years. I think he's an
Yeah.
exclusive rights free agent, so that means Vikings get him at basically a minimum contract next year. He'll be an RFA, restricted free agent, after that, so they can choose to tender him at that point, and basically get a right of first refusal on his next contract.
Hmm.
And then after that, he would be a free agent. Basically, going to be under cheap control for a long time. We're going to talk about. I think the next guy on our list is Seze Otomo,
Yes.
and basically all these guys, you got to, Chris Rumpf, that hire was worth its weight in gold because that dude, everybody, literally every single interior defensive lineman is like, has had an incredible step forward this year. So really excited that guy. It's like we've talked about this before, but Rumpf came from the Bears previously, and we'd always play the Bears, and
Yep.
it'd be Roy Robertson Harris. Who is this guy
Yes.
destroying us? Well, now the Vikings are the guys with the other team who are going like, who is Kairos Tonga? Who is
Yes.
Seze Otomewo? I remember Charles Harris struggling to say that name last week. Well, these are guys that are coming along really strongly, and that's the magic of good positional coaching. So exciting to see it happen. What did you take away from Otomewo in this game?
Yeah, so Tomo, I thought there were a few things. I thought he won with quick. So just to be clear with what he's playing, and this is what I expected when we drafted him. He's playing the kind of base defensive end role that's in the Vikings defense. That means he's a 3 technique, a 4 eye, or a 5 technique, depending on the alignment. He's not playing as an edge rusher, right? Which was his role in college at the University of Minnesota, right? So in this game, I think he showed pretty good flashes of what he can be. First of all, he showed the length to be able to lock out against offensive linemen, against an offensive tackle in is it Braxton Jones, who's their rookie left tackle, who's actually really, really long. Braxton Jones has like 35 plus inch arms. It's like 90 plus percentile in terms of arm length for him. It says Otomo has pretty long arms for a defensive lineman at 34 inches, and he was able to lock him out and make a play and just kind of influence plays there. He was able to use quickness to get a TFL and also kind of lock out the player he was going against. I think it was Braxton Jones again. And they also showed a really nice recognition on the screen. That's just a instinctual thing for a defensive lineman. When you feel the offensive lineman kind of give up against you, you notice for the screen. So it's a good kind of instincts thing that he showed. I will say I just got done charting the Vikings defense against the Giants, and he did get some run in that game, and I don't think he played quite as well, particularly against double teams. He ends up getting crushed a little bit, so he doesn't have the strength. Obviously, he was undersized for the role he's in at about 270 pounds in college, so I imagine he's still putting on weight, and that's something I hope he'll be able to develop over the course of time without losing the quickness that he has and he's shown. So I like what I've seen so far in a small role, kind of in a backup role, and I think he's somebody who's going to flash moving forward and maybe somebody who can be more important in future years. But for the rest of this season, for the playoffs, I don't know if I want him on the field a lot, just because I think you can run the ball down his throat.
Yeah, definitely. But it's nice to have somebody with that potential. I mean, he's
Mm-hmm.
not, 99th percentile athlete, but what he does bring is a length that you can't teach, and he's pretty explosive as well. I feel like 34-inch arms, that's really long, but it looks even longer on the field. I don't know, maybe he wears like big gloves or
Yeah.
something, but especially going up against interior offensive linemen, if that's the plan for him moving forward. Tackles tend to be long, but guards and centers definitely not. So that's definitely an advantage. It's like boxing. Whoever has the longest reach tends to win those matchups. So yeah, and that screen, I'm glad you pointed that out too, because I caught that too, and he caught it before anybody. Like he just
Yes.
instinctively felt, he was like, I won this rep too easily, and just immediately turned to the running back or whatever. So that was, you don't usually see that kind of. That's a savvy you typically see from veterans, not rookies. So to have that on top of the tool, start to showcase a little bit, even if he's not Harrison Phillips out there eating double teams, but to be able to sort of lock out on single team blocks and do that really well as a rookie. That's exciting, and it's nice to have another contributor from this rookie class. Who else did you want to talk about, Bears?
Yeah, so next I just have Josh Metellus, who is a third year player at this point. Is he second or third year player at this point?
Third year, I think.
I think he's third year out of the University of Michigan. Obviously, he's gotten a fair bit of run as Harrison Smith has been injured this season. He's missed a couple games, obviously. I think as an injury precaution, we sat him out of the Bears game. I imagine if that game had mattered, Harrison Smith would have played, right? So Metellus has gotten a lot of run as another safety in this defense, and in this game against the Bears, he also played some slot corner snaps. So it was kind of interesting to see him get in there, and actually I kind of like him in the slot corner role more than I've liked him in the deep safety role. I think he's a really aggressive player, and I think that's a positive for him in a lot of ways. He's very aggressive in run support, but I do think, particularly in the Lions game earlier this year, that run support led him to bite on some plays, on play action plays, that put him in harmful positions for the Vikings defense. So I think that the run support is great, but it's not necessarily what I want from a deep safety. So I don't know if he's a better replacement for Cam Bynum, who I also don't think is playing very well. But I don't know if I'd suggest the Vikings starting him over him. With that said, I thought he was really impressive in man coverage in this game against the Bears. There were quite a few snaps where he kept with players on crossing routes across the field, or just kept really tight man coverage and made pass breakups. Obviously, also he's had like 2 pump blocks in the past 2 weeks, right? So he's been really impressive, or 2 of the past 3 weeks, I guess. He had one against the Giants and one against the Packers. So he's been really impressive as a special teamer and should be a core player moving forward. I just wanted to give him a shout out because I know he did play some man coverage at Michigan. Obviously, Don Brown's defense at the time was a very aggressive cover one defense that blitzed a lot. So your safety is going to end up in man coverage, but I think that's translated well over to the NFL level. And maybe, my role for him moving forward, or what I'd like to maybe see from him grow into, is kind of the tight end eraser role, right? And I think he might have the size and the man coverage chops to do that.
It's impressive to see him, and nice to see a safety with that downhill aggression, which is kind
Mm-hmm.
of so crucial, especially in this Donatel defense where you're starting from a too high look every single snap, pre-snap. To be able to rotate that and to come down and to nail those crossers. You saw him come up, I think, with a couple or at least one pass breakup in this game based on that. So it was good to see him contribute. It was nice to be able to see, like, when Sully went down or when Sully was out of the game, like to actually see, oh yeah, we have other people who can play
Yes.
nickel. It's not just Sully. So um, it might not be who you expect. It's a safety, but Sully himself is kind of more like a safety than a cornerback in the way he plays, in the way he matches up, and the way we have him play that position too. So yeah, it was a nice game from Metellus. Duke Shelley, also want to give him
Yes.
a shout out. Tonga got the revenge game again as a former Bear. Shelley, I feel like, was really feeling it. And you look at he was mic'd up, and he's talking about how this game's different, and he came away with a pick, and it was awesome to see. In fairness, he was beat on that pick, and the backup quarterback that was in just
Yes.
threw up a duck, and Shelley was able to track it to his credit and come away with the catch to his credit, which the wide receiver was not. The wide receiver was not tracking it very well.
Yep.
But Shelley, I think, had a really impressive game. He's continuing to just rack up so many pass breakups. He finishes the year. I mean, this is overrating him a little bit, but he finishes the year with the third best coverage grade in the NFL, behind only Patrick Surtain and who was number 2, like Ramsey or Darby or somebody. So
Yeah, I don't remember.
like crazy company to rack up all those pass breakups. I will say he gets beat vertically, and in this game, I think in particular, the Bears, they have one route, and that's like running fast. So
Yes.
that's kind of their receiver room, and that's what meshes well with Justin Fields when he's playing, which he did in this game. But we did see Shelley and Peterson as well get beat deep, and I keep harping on this because I keep expecting the Vikings to get burned by it, and it doesn't happen all that. I mean, it happened against the Giants, but other than that, like I feel like, well, other than this upcoming playoff matchup, I feel like I keep waiting for the shoe to drop, but. That's not to pick on Duke Shelley because he's made a lot of really good plays coming downhill. He plays very aggressively, but he's also I feel like he's hard to fool with double moves or with moves that like he's very quick to follow receivers in their breaks. He reads routes really well. The one way he does tend to get picked on is if a quarterback and a receiver are in perfect sync, he just doesn't have the length to disrupt the
Yep.
catch point. If they are able to establish leverage, breaking one way or another way on him. So, he's just never going to have the sort of long arms to sort of, punch the ball out from behind a receiver. So, or at least not against the bigger guys, which they tend to match up on him that way. But just a very good cornerback. I don't think the Vikings have the season they're in. If it weren't for Duke Shelley kind of coming in, it was from the start with that Bills game. He just kind of came out, and in overtime against Josh Allen, he comes away with a pass breakup in the end zone, and we were all like, "Who is this Duke Shelley guy?"
Yeah.
But from that point on, like he's really like earned a starting role and then some in this defense, and that's he brings a tenacity, a level of dog to him that you don't see from a lot of the other guys. He gives it his all every single play. He's not afraid to get physical, to lower the shoulder, to tackle the guys. He doesn't really miss tackles.
Yep.
He makes a lot of like ankle tackles where it's just like ripping guys, reminded me of like Prime Harrison Smith ripping guys to the ground by their ankles or by their shoe or whatever. So I kind of want to just give him a shout out for the revenge game, but also for the season that he's had and the way he's been able to, despite everything with Dantzler penciled in, with Evans playing really well and then getting banged up, and to come along and sort of unseat Cam Dantzler as the starter. I feel like going forward, Dantzler now being healthy, I feel like Shelley's still the guy, and he's done it just by playing, giving it 110% every single snap. But not just
Yep.
playing with unbridled aggression, but like smart aggression too. So he's played really well. So I'm really happy with him.
Yeah, for Shelley, I mean, just like you said, the competitiveness at the catch point, and even if he does get deep, he's got surprisingly good recovery skills and the ability to just find the ball at the catch point. Like you said, I think with the lack of length, he can get bodied by receivers sometimes. But again, against the Bears, like he's making pass breakups against Equanimeous St. Brown, who's 6'4", or Chase Claypool, and that sort of thing. Like he's making plays against bigger receivers, even though he's 5'9" or 5'8" or whatever he is. So it's been a really impressive ride from Duke Shelley. And while I agree that I don't think he's a top tier corner in the NFL, right? Like the PFF grade suggests, I think he's played well enough to be a starter, and I feel pretty good about him in the playoffs for the Vikings. Now let's roll it over to somebody people have probably been expecting us to talk about in Jalen Nailor, who had a big game. He's had a big couple of games, right? Obviously, he had the touchdown and a couple of nice plays against the Packers, and then rolled that into a 4-catch performance, the second leading receiver on the team in the second half against the Bears. And I think he showed quite a number of things that I thought were impressive. He showed the ability to catch the ball through contact. There was a player who contacted him in his back. He showed the ability to catch the ball outside of his frame. There was a throw that Nick Mullins placed it well, but it was a half a step late, so it was behind him. That's a difficult catch for a receiver to make when they're running full speed. And then he parlayed that into additional yardage after the catch. I think he's shown his speed after the catch and a natural feel for where to go after the catch, right? There was a play where he had a catch in zone. It was kind of a sit route, right, where it's an out route, but you kind of have the option to sit down. And he was able to field the defender on his back, turn away from that, and turn upfield and get extra yardage. There was a play, was it a screen that he took for 12 or so yards? That was a pretty nice play as well. So just in general, I've been pretty impressed with Jalen Nailor and his ability to do things outside of his frame. He showed some feel for zone coverage, just make catches, make plays on the ball, and I think the touchdown was a busted coverage last week against the Packers, if I'm not mistaken. But still, that speed showed up on his college tape, and I think it showed up here at the NFL level. Like, I think it matches what he had in college, and that's been pretty impressive. I've been happy with how he's developed. Now, I don't think he should start over Thielen or Osborne. I think Thielen or Osborne are still consistently getting open, and that's important for the Vikings offense, and more important, and not something I'm willing to upset the apple cart and put Jalen Nailor in there for. But I do like what he's done, and I think he'll be a a nice piece to have in the pocket moving forward.
Yeah, the thing that really impressed me with Naylor is he was getting open on pretty much every rep. And
Yep.
granted, these are backups, but like to be able to do that, like get open even when you're not targeted. I mean, he was stacking guys immediately off the line of scrimmage and getting open. Could have been tossed long touchdowns on so many routes. And the other thing, like I was excited when we drafted him because I felt like he had the skill set to develop the type of receiver who's very good at separating and getting open. He has the athletic profile where he's explosive off his release and can be sudden out of his snap. But at Michigan State, he would just run very rounded routes, or they didn't really have him use. They used him more as like a gadgety type guy than like a running a full route tree. So now you see him weeks after 17 weeks with Keenan McCardle coaching him up, and he's a lot more precise in his routes, and it's resulting in him. He ran like skinny posts and slant routes and
Mm-hmm.
stuff where he's not losing any speed out of his breaks. If anything, he's accelerating out of his breaks, and that's a really exciting skill set to build around. Granted, a lot of his production has come out of against backups or in garbage time or something. So you don't want to. Well, like Amir Smith Marset last year, you don't want to get too hung up on, oh wow, he posted 100 yards on bad players or whatever. But I feel like the plays he's doing and the way he's getting open, and even if you consider these defenders are terrible, but he's running these routes against on grass or whatever, like yeah, but still the routes are really good, independent
Yeah.
of the defenders too. So, um, you know, I feel like. Um, he's another player. Like he's technically the highest graded rookie with the highest yards per route run. You don't want to get too crazy with those grades because that overrate his play. But at the same time, the flashes he's shown are the sorts of flashes that develop into have the potential to develop into a starting caliber wide receiver down the road. And I feel like especially that separation ability. I mean, it's great to see him holding on to balls where he gets hit and making contested catches and doing those things because that's not what I would associate with Naylor. But I think the thing that got me really excited is like, wow, he explodes out of his release, his breaks. He's stacking guys immediately off the line of scrimmage. So that gets you very excited about that kind of skill set, especially as somebody who could. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but let me be a homer for a second, comparing that skill set with Justin Jefferson because that's if we could get an explosive, speedy threat to pair with Justin Jefferson, that could really open up the top of offenses for the offense down the road. So don't want to count any chickens before they hatch, but if there were if Naylor were to develop into a very meaningful contributor for the Vikings long term, I feel like you could go back and look at this tape and see like you can see that separation ability starting to blossom in these last couple games. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but I feel like the tape itself is good independent of the circumstances of the situation. So it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to wrap us up for the Bears game. There were a couple other players, CJ Ham, Alex Madison, who had really nice games in that game. We've seen that kind of stuff from them before. I think we've seen games like that from them before. So I don't want to go too deep into them necessarily because we are running pretty long here when we said we were going to spend a lot of time on the Giants game. And I think it's worth it to spend a lot of time on the Giants game. So let's transition over to that. And I think the first thing I want to start with is just a little bit of an update in terms of injuries, right? Because Brian O'Neill obviously has been out for the season. And I'm comparing these injuries to when we played the Giants just 3 weeks ago in Week 16, right? Brian O'Neill is now out with that partially torn Achilles. It sounds like Blake Brandel might be able to come off of IR and play. Is he allowed to come off of IR right now? He's done the time frame.
They've designated him to return, so
Okay.
they can choose to activate him and bring somebody else off the active roster. And it sounds like that's what they will do because I believe he was a limited participant. Well,
Yes.
I'm not sure. He practiced. I don't know in what capacity. Maybe they don't have to designate if he was a limited participant or not while he's still designated to return rather than on the active roster. But
Yeah.
I think the plan is it'll be Brandel over Udo.
I just saw the injury report and Brandel was not on it. Bradbury on that injury report was a limited participant, so that'll be something to watch as the week goes on. Obviously, he has a back injury that he aggravated, in a car accident. So it's kind of touch and go. We have Chris Reed as the backup center. That'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I didn't think Chris Reed played all that bad in the 2 games. I think there were losses that he had where he got beat pretty quickly on a couple refs, but in general, like, he shows the strength, and he actually showed the movement skills, better movement skills than I expected in terms of making reach blocks and that sort of thing. So I'm not like critical red alert if Bradbury's not going to play. I think I would actually feel worse about the drop off from Blake Brandel to Oli Udoh, or really from Brian O'Neill to Oli Udoh, than I do about the drop off from Garrett Bradbury to Chris Reed in the offense. I didn't think Oli Udoh played particularly well against the Bears. Like, if we were looking for a weak spot, it was him. He lost with speed a couple times, and against quickness. So that's a bit of a downer on the Vikings offensive line. Now, the Giants are getting a lot of reinforcements on defense, particularly in the secondary. Obviously, we shredded them through the air with Justin Jefferson in the last game. But Adoree Jackson, their top corner, is coming back. Xavier McKinney, who had a hand thing, is coming back. Azeez Ojulari, the edge rusher to pair with Kayvon Thibodeau, is coming back. So those guys all didn't play in Week 16. Those guys all are on track to play this week. Leonard Williams, who did play in the game against us, missed the last game or so with an injury. It sounds like he's back and ready to go as well. So the Giants defense is at full strength, or nearing full strength for what they have on that side of the ball. With those injuries, the Vikings offensive line, the Giants defense, anything you see there, Nick, that concerns you, or how do you think that's going to play out differently than in the first game?
I mean, you saw, on the one hand, I feel like the simplified thing would be just to throw Adoree Jackson on Justin Jefferson and keep doing what you were doing last game because it kind of worked out. Or that's your identity on offenses, or on with Wink Martindale on defenses, to blitz all the time. They blitz on, I think, 44% of dropbacks, opposing dropbacks on the season. They blitzed the Vikings 52%, so they went even as blitz heavy as Wink has been. They were even more blitz heavy against Kirk. I feel like you've continued to see Kirk, for whatever reason it is, struggle against the blitz this year. I feel like part of it is, like, I feel like Kirk kind of, when he sees the blitz, he accelerates his mental process. So he only gets to like one read, and if that isn't open, it leads to a negative play or something. So I feel like that's why teams do it. And Wink is very good at designing his blitzes so that it's not like he blitzes guys and then you'll leave one guy just wide open downfield. Like he knows how to beat the blitz and stuff. So like he'll blitz, he'll do crazy cover zero blitzes or whatever, but he'll also train his defensive linemen to, hold the guard or whatever, or to hold the running back if they engage him in pass protection so that they don't slip out for a screen or whatever, and you shut down the screen as well. So there isn't an easy way necessarily to scheme out, but I feel like Wink is going to continue to do what Wink does, and he's going to continue to blitz, and he's going to blitz on early downs, and he's going to throw different looks at Kirk, and he's going to try and keep Kirk a little bit confused while still fundamentally playing a man-match type of defense. You just won't necessarily know exactly how it's all going to, who's blitzing and who's coming from where. And especially with injuries in the secondary or on the offensive line, you want to exploit, poor communication between a lack of chemistry between guys who have not played with each other for many games. If it's Blake Brandel and Chris Reed, I'm not sure we've even seen that combination. So that's, you kind of want to prey on that weakness a little bit, especially as a blitz-heavy guy in a defense who knows how to do it. And just having Adoree Jackson makes you feel a lot more comfortable that you have that guy covering Justin Jefferson. You have Xavier McKinney covering T.J. Hawkinson, rather than just complete randos who probably aren't NFL caliber starters. So I feel like it just reinforces what the Giants do well. I'm not necessarily sure they should scrap that and start doing like the halves to Jefferson side or whatever, because that's not kind of who they are. I feel like they did that a little bit in the Giants. It wasn't just completely cover one across the board every single time or whatever, but I feel like these reinforcements allow them to do what they want to do a little bit better. So I'm not necessarily expecting a very, very different defensive plan from Wink, even though Jefferson was able to sort of roast them a little bit. I feel like having Adoree Jackson back for them makes them feel a little bit more comfortable. Maybe this time, if Jair Alexander can do it, if Darius Slay can do it, maybe Adoree Jackson can do it too, and we'll continue to blitz and see how that goes.
Yeah, the problem is, as you kind of mentioned, like for me, from the Vikings perspective, right? The problem with that is Jair Alexander and Adoree Jackson did it because and Jair Jesus. Jair Alexander
Very slight.
and Darius Slay did it because they had that safety help over the top, right? And it wasn't a true man to man coverage. Like when teams have tried to go lock down, put Justin Jefferson on an island, it hasn't gone well. Marshawn Lattimore, who I think is a much better corner than Adoree Jackson, got roasted by Justin Jefferson, right? We've seen corners time and time again get roasted by Justin Jefferson this season if you try to lock him down an island and you don't give that safety help with a press where you're basically bracketing him the entire way. So I think he'll be able to do that against, that kind of single coverage. If they try to put Adoree Jackson on it. Obviously, he had like 12 receptions in the game against the Giants earlier this season. TJ Hawkinson, I think they also need to try to develop an answer for, right? He had a great game against them, 2 touchdowns, over 10 catches, over 100 yards as well. So I think those weapons can continue to be effective against the Giants defense even with that. I think the question is whether or not pressure will be able to get there more often. Dexter Lawrence is kind of a game wrecker on the Giants defensive line. I think we saw that, on some snaps against the Vikings, but we were overall able to mitigate them just by getting them to our open wide receivers, right? So if we do have, and maybe that is the key, right? Maybe Adoree Jackson provides a little bit better coverage than like Darnay Holmes or whoever it was on Justin Jefferson did last time, and that split second difference is what makes the difference for the pressure to be able to get there. So for Dexter Lawrence and that Giants defensive line, which really has a number of quality players on it, I mentioned Azeez Ojulari coming back. I mentioned Kayvon Thibodeau, and now those edge rushers might go to go up against a backup right tackle, right, who we need to give more help than we needed to give O'Brien O'Neal. How do you think the offense can adjust to protect against the pass rush that the Giants are going to be able to throw against us and the run defense too?
Yeah, I mean, going up against Andre Patterson, Andre Patterson's very good at opponent scouting, knowing your guys' weak points. So he's, and as good as Darrisaw is, he knows Darrisaw's, he's potential to give up the edge a little bit, not set out wide enough, or sometimes he not react to bull rushes fast. So, those are the kinds of things like, and not just Darrisaw, but every single guy out there. If it's Bradbury, Bradbury's he's improved this year, but he's an undersized center, so he can be beaten with power, or you can beat him immediately off the snap with, they're gonna have scouting reports for all these guys. So with Brandell, you're gonna need to give chip help. It helps having Irv Smith back healthy in this game because you can see how they match. If we go with 13 personnel, we bring out Hawkinson, Irv, and Johnny Munt, and see how the Giants match with us. That's actually a pretty a lot of times you see 13 personnel only in goal line situations, but if it's Irv and it's Hawk, those are basically receivers who can also kind of line up in line as well. And Munt is more of a true tight end. He's not going to give you a lot, but if the Giants match up that with few corners or whatever, then you could kind of run down the throat with that, and maybe that helps. And then on passing situations, you're able to give a lot more chip help to your tackle or whatever. So, but the biggest thing I feel like is just being confident in your hot reads and having kind of counters for the kind of blitz looks that Wink brings, and making Kirk comfortable knowing where to go with the football if somebody blitzes. Because anytime you blitz, you have got a big numbers advantage in the receiving game, and it's just a matter of do you have the right routes at the right depth to take advantage of that. It's not as simple as just throwing into the blitz, because a lot of times with fire zones, whatever, guys will drop back into where the blitz is. So you kind of have to be smart about it. But I feel like more than like chip help, more than running back, more than getting their pass protection, communication and setting protections the right way, I feel like Wink is always going to be able to send more guys than you can block, and it's really just the guy who has to beat the blitz is Kirk Cousins, and he struggled with it this season, despite being generally good at it over his career. Kirk is usually a good, we knock him for being a robot, but a lot of times, especially against the blitz, being a robot is good. You don't want to panic under pressure, and that's what Kirk Cousins doesn't panic. He just sorts of, okay, it's blitz, then I'm going to automatically throw it here, and you just want to make sure you calibrate that thought process to get the ball to where it goes to where you can sustain drives, and you're not just like, I mean, this was a problem with the blitz and why it was partially successful last time that Wink Martindale did it, is if you can just generate throws, that are immediately to a guy in the flat who gets tackled for 1 yard or whatever, then that's a successful play for the defense. You just have to make sure that you have a counter for the blitzes, and your hot reads are able to move the ball down the field, and they're able to take advantage a little bit of the numbers advantage that you're going to be getting there. And when you have all these weapons, you want to make sure you're able to get the ball in their hands with the position to make plays downfield. So hopefully they see a little bit more of that. Do you have any other thoughts on top of that?
Yeah, so one thing I want to add that's kind of a general thought I have about the Vikings offense, and it is something that I noticed in the Bears game, is you mentioned, the 12 personnel or 13 personnel that they could run. Obviously, they also have the versatility with CJ Ham to run 21 personnel. And something they did with 21 personnel in the Bears game, and the Bears tried to double Justin Jefferson on a number of snaps that he was in, right, with kind of that cover 2 coverage, that shell over top with a corner pressing him at the bottom, or at least a corner trying to bracket him, right? And what the Vikings did a few times as a response that I thought was pretty interesting, and I don't think I'd really seen from them earlier in this season, is use CJ Ham on a smash concept. With Justin Jefferson, or use CJ Ham underneath. The defense kind of ignores CJ Ham as a pass threat, right? I don't think defenses, he's kind of the bottom of the list for Vikings pass threats in terms of what they're concerned about. When it's somebody in the backfield, then we're going to be more concerned about Dalvin Cook than they are about CJ Ham, right? But what the Vikings did is to get him into this concept, they use fast motion. So he was in I formation, and then he takes 2 shuffle steps to whatever direction prior to the snap, and he's able to get out into the route pretty quickly. They had Jefferson, and they did it in the second half with Jalen Nailor, to a single receiver side, and then they had trips to the other side, right? So they had 2 receivers to the other side, right? Because it's I formation, there are 2 running backs in the backfield. So that means that the backside of this coverage, the defense is focused on Justin Jefferson, right? They're focused on that singled up wide receiver, and they were late to react to him coming out of the backfield. It got him 10 yards on basically every single one of those plays. And then the third play that he ended up coming out of the backfield and it was a success on was one where he was split out all the way to the end. Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen run 2 vertical routes, and the defense sinks back to bracket both of those guys, and it's checked down underneath to him, and he has a lot of space. So kind of the defense forgetting about him and using checkdowns or using short routes when defenses are bracketing players deep is a way you can move the ball down the field if the Giants choose to do that. Now, obviously, that may be more applicable, later in the playoffs if the Vikings are able to beat the Giants, but it was just a kind of an interesting thought that I had.
Yeah, and Ham you can make your jokes about fullbacks or whatever, but I mean, you saw it in that Bears game. He's good after the catch. He's not like electric or fast, but he knows how to get upfield, and he's very good at breaking tackles. Has like a very stout,
Yes.
thick build. He's able to sort of generate a lot, good contact balance, able to shuffle off contact, but also able to get a full head of steam and start getting yards after the catch. And the way defenses cheat towards Jefferson, if it's at the top of those smash concepts, those high lows, like it'll give him a lot of space to, so I feel like that is a way, getting these extra guys in there who can either chip help or they can be sort of hidden threats, I feel like. I think about that with Irv Smith too, a guy who I think a lot of people are sleeping on a little bit, but I feel like who could actually, his versatility, I think opens up a lot of things for this offense as well.
Yeah, and Irv Smith, like CJ Ham, would probably be the 4th or 5th threat that the defense is worried about in the passing game at this point, right? Like earlier in the season, Irv Smith was the lead tight end, at least from a pass catching perspective. So he had more focus on him. If you have Irv Smith in 2 tight end sets with TJ Hawkinson, they're going to be more worried about TJ Hawkinson. And that helps Irv take kind of a more sneaky role, I guess, on the offense, where he's able to get some of the stuff like Johnny Munt was earlier in the season, where he's leaking out and he's wide open and he's got 10 yards of space. Well, Irv's a more dynamic athlete than Johnny Munt is, so he should be able to hopefully make more of those plays. Definitely agree with that. If we flip it over to the other side of the ball, on the defensive side, like I mentioned, I just did a deep dive on the Vikings defense against the Giants offense. And I've got some pretty interesting stuff here, so I'll bring it up and then we'll talk about anything you want to talk about. But the first thing I have for the Vikings, and I think they actually did a very good job in general of this against the Giants, is shore up their pass rush layering. You just need to make sure that's on point every single snap against a quarterback like Daniel Jones, who's able to scramble. He did have a couple successful scrambles in this game. He had 3 that were kind of successful. One set up that 4th and 2 touchdown run that they had, but the other 2 were 10+ yard gains and first downs for the offense. On the flip side of that, the Vikings contained him to just a 2-yard gain in a long distance scenario on 1, and they also sacked him 3 times, right? So it was kind of 50-50, and in general, I think they did a pretty good job containing him in the pocket, but he just has that playmaking ability with his legs. So it's just something you need to pay attention to when you're doing there. You can't vacate the middle of the field, leave that wide open for him to just run forward. You can't overextend kind of vertically right back into the pocket or underextend. You need to be able to loop around and get to him if he's trying to escape the pocket. So it's just something, especially for the defensive tackles, to pay attention to not get out of position when he's trying to escape.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you don't want to have to dedicate a spy in coverage because, one, we're a zone defense. We don't necessarily want to match up in man. Maybe we can get away with it against the Giants. That's the one thing I'll say is that, given the lack of receiving talent relatively on the Giants' end, other than Saquon Barkley, there aren't many downfield threats you're worried about. And Saquon's more he's a huge threat, as we saw the last time we matched up, but he's not a downfield threat. So you can get away with a little bit more man coverage, but at the same time, you would rather dedicate resources elsewhere. And the only way to get away rushing a dangerous rushing quarterback like Daniel Jones is to be very, very sound in your rushing lane so that he's not breaking the pocket, gashing you for big runs downfield. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and then the second one I have, and really these 3 are going to come towards coverage. I've got kind of 3 things that I've identified that the Vikings really struggled with against the Giants. One was a Patrick Peterson specific thing. He lost twice on sluggo routes in this game, and the Giants tried it a number of times. So that's something they're really going to have to be on top of. A sluggo, for those of you who don't know, is a double move vertical route. It's where the player starts to run a slant and then turns that into a go route. Patrick Peterson bit on the slant, let up. There was one play where he let up a big gain to Isaiah Hodgins. There was one play where Daniel Jones, I think, missed it, and it should have been a big gain. And it might have happened to Duke Shelley as well. No, you know what? Duke Shelley was on top of a sluggo route, but that was more in cover 3 where they were playing deep coverage. The Vikings played a ton of man against the Giants in the first game, so that's something to pay attention to because that's a man coverage beater, right? You have the corner trying to jump one thing, and it turns into another thing. The second thing, and they really exploited Chandon Sullivan and Duke Shelley on this, was communication on switch releases. Maybe with more time, they'll get better at this, but the communication on the switch releases, and again, this is in man coverage for the defense. So, and to explain, a switch release is when you have 2 receivers on the side of the field and they cross each other at the snap. The Giants love doing this. They ran this, I don't know, probably 10, 15 times. They ran route combinations that had switch releases. And there were quite a few times where Chandon Sullivan and Duke Shelley got mixed up. There was a big play, the 33-yard gain, which I think was the Giants' biggest gain of the day, to Richie James, was a switch release where Chandon Sullivan collided with, I think it was Isaiah Hodgins, who was outside coming inside right. He was in man coverage. Sullivan was supposed to be in man coverage on Richie James, who was inside going outside. And because he collides with Hodgins, it's a wide open receiver. So that on switch releases, they love to do it for even in-breaking routes, and they also like to use stack alignments to get in-breaking routes open. So this was something we saw, and Harrison Smith ended up in man coverage to the tight end side a lot. They used, on that final drive where they scored a touchdown, they used a stack release with mesh to get a receiver an inside release against the alignment. The Vikings couldn't cover that inside release. Harrison Smith couldn't cover it. He tries to pass it off to Jordan Hicks, who's in position over the middle of the field, but Hicks is late to cover it, and he's running against, I think it was Richie James again, a wide receiver or no, it was Darius Slayton, actually, who gets 26 yards on the play with a bunch of yards after the catch because the Vikings are in man coverage. Jordan Hicks can't cover his new responsibility. He's, in that role, you're going to try to kind of collision a slant or something like that. You're not necessarily expecting to have to run across the field with another wide receiver as a linebacker, and Hicks doesn't quite have the speed to do that. So that's an issue. The other thing was contested catches on in-breaking routes like slants. Hodgins did a really nice job bodying guys up. Duke Shelley got bodied up. Patrick Peterson got bodied up twice. And Patrick Peterson has been phenomenal at breaking up passes. But I want to give Hodgins credit for being able to stay in contact through the back and kind of box out in those scenarios. So I think against man coverage, the Vikings have some things to shore up if they want to run as much man coverage against the Giants this time as they did previously.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny we spend all that time without talking about Saquon Barkley. The one thing I would I would add is if they're going to scrape exchange, make sure the linebackers are ready to do it and are aggressive getting to the hold, because if you're not covering the edge, Saquon will destroy you to the edge, especially if it's Jordan Hicks out there. You saw them get beat on that a few times, especially with the Giants. I mean, they like to pull guys outside. They like to create space so that, I mean, when you really get guys moving and pulling in space on the outside, that's when you can really get some explosives downfield. Because you're getting linemen against tinier linebackers or often secondary guys. So and Saquon's just so good. The Vikings love playing light boxes. Only the Texans play fewer 8-man boxes. The Vikings, I think, led the league in being lighter, like out gap boxes in the NFL. So that's usually you can get away with it, but with the Giants, especially with Saquon, but also with guys like Andrew Thomas, an All-Pro player, or All-Pro caliber, I guess they haven't officially announced it yet, but expect him to be up there. They're going to be able to generate some explosives in the run game as well. Got to remember, last game, that explosive 4th and 2 touchdown that tied it for the Giants, or gave them the opportunity with a 2-point conversion to tie it. I just got to respect your run lanes at all times. We've seen the Vikings get gashed on this before, where they get into passing downs, they bring out their NASCAR personnel. It's DJ Wanham, it's Darius Smith, it's Dalvin Tomlinson, but everybody's pinning their ears back, and then they get gashed on a draw or something. So just have to always remember to respect the run lanes, and that's true. I feel like that goes hand in hand with respecting your passing lanes as well. But yeah, I feel like last time the thing that really sticks out in my mind is how often those skinny posts were wide open. I feel like if we're going to play man coverage, I almost feel like we should just shade guys inside, because they gave it up so easily every single time. Just start off a half a yard or a half step inside of your guy, and don't be ready for the double moves, because I'm sure Kafka and Dable are really good coaches. They're really good offensive minds. That's kind of why they were hired to be this whole thing, and it's kind of why the Giants are here, despite a roster that is not one of the most talented rosters in football. Don't want to disrespect a playoff opponent too much, but they're here because of the really genius play calling and offensive design. And the weaknesses in the Vikings defense, they know how to exploit it. I mean, last week, despite the Vikings being a zone defense, they came in and they immediately had man beaters ready to destroy the Vikings' new brand of reinvented man defense. So they're going to have answers. They're going to play things smart, and they're going to know that Patrick Peterson is liable to get beat deep. Duke Shelley is going to be a poor matchup against Kenny Golladay if he's ready to go. You're going to see, they're going to continue to rely on the things that worked last time, like the double moves and the inside breaking routes and stuff. So Vikings have to be ready to stop those things that weren't working last time. Another thing I'll say is last time around, I thought Daniel Jones had a very, very good game, an above average game for Daniel Jones. And that wasn't just, the Vikings played poorly. It was independent of everything else. He had exceptional precision. He was pushing things downfield a little bit more. Maybe that's, maybe he chooses to play a different brand of football against the kind of looks that the Vikings give him. But I hope he has more of a typical Daniel Jones game rather than Super Saiyan Danny Dimes that we saw last time around. So that would help. That would go a long way to helping the defense as well. But yeah, I mean, despite the lack of receiving talent and just the offensive talent here doesn't scare you. With how smart they set things up, that's what surviving Dable's opening script and surviving the way he counters and he preys on the things you're bad at. That's what worries me most about this entire matchup, offense or defense. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to a couple things there, one thing is with the matching with light boxes, I kind of tracked that as I was charting the game. I have 69 total plays. That includes the 3 plays that were negated by post-snap penalties. But the Vikings matched 11 personnel with 7 players in the box just 4 times. For the record, the Giants played with 11 personnel on 59 snaps, right? So 55 of those snaps, we had 6 or fewer players in the box, which means you're down players with the box if the tight end's there. There were snaps, where the Giants were in empty or the Giants had the tight end split out wider, but most of that was with the tight end in line. So that's a very limited number of snaps. When the Giants went to heavier personnel, they only played 2 snaps with 8 players in the box. A lot of their other snaps with heavier personnel were 7 players in the box, where you are matching 1-for-1 there because there's either 2 tight ends now or there's an extra running back. To move it over to Saquon Barkley a little bit, who you mentioned and I had not mentioned previously, that's a good point. The Giants loved using Saquon Barkley in this game. They didn't run the ball all that much. They only really had 17 rushing attempts outside of Daniel Jones had 40-plus passing attempts in this game. It's not like the game script was totally out of hand either, right? It was within 1 point in the fourth quarter, like late in the fourth quarter, until the Vikings scored that last Justin Jefferson touchdown to go up by 8. And then the Giants immediately answered with a scoring drive, right? So it's not like the game was totally out of hand. They just didn't like running the ball all that much. But what they did like doing is using Saquon Barkley in this flat. They ran plays where they'd have 2 receivers run vertical routes to try to clear out space and have Saquon Barkley run kind of like a swing pass. And Saquon Barkley was the number 1 option in that play. They ran that play probably 5 or 6 times just to get him open out in space. They use him in the passing game pretty often. So he is obviously a player you have to contain, and he showed off the I wouldn't say Saquon had a great game, but he showed off the athleticism on a number of run plays, and obviously that final touchdown where he got 27 yards. If I flip it over to the run game, I was actually kind of surprised by how the lack of diversity from the Giants run game. The only runs I charted were inside zone and split zone, and I don't think there were any duo mix-ups to that inside zone. It was almost all inside zone. Split zone, I think, is good against the Vikings because Eric Kendricks can kind of get out of his gap. Interestingly, the Giants ran a number of snaps. I shouldn't say a number of snaps, but they ran 3 or 4 snaps with 21 personnel. On almost every single one of those snaps, I think it was actually 4 snaps they ran with 21 personnel. One was a split back shotgun snap. The other 3 snaps, they used a jet motion or an orbit motion with one of the running backs. The first time it was orbit motion with Saquon. The next 2 times it was jet motion with either Brightwell or Breida. I'm not sure exactly which one. And they ran split zone out of that, which is the tight end which is zone to one side, the tight end coming across to try to give you a cutback lane. The Giants did not hand it off to the orbit or the jet player. I'm willing to bet you that the Giants try to get it to the jet player at least once in this game, or the orbit player at least once in this game, and might put Saquon Barkley in that position to get him outside, right? So that's kind of just an interesting thing that I noted with their split zone usage, and that was the majority of their split zone usage. Other than that, they ran like 14 inside zone plays, and that was pretty much all they did in terms of running the football. I would say they did not have a lot of success. Their longest run outside of that 27-yard touchdown run, which was kind of a weird situation for the Vikings, right? Because they were playing against the pass on a 4th and 2. I think primarily playing against the pass. Their longest run of the day was for 7 yards. That wasn't their longest non-Daniel Jones scramble of the day was for 7 yards. It wasn't very successful, particularly when you see the Vikings playing with late boxes all of the time. The other thing I found was interesting is the majority of their runs came out of shotgun. They did play 14 under center snaps. They ran straight drop back play action on 12 of those snaps. It was not successful at all. Their longest gain on those snaps was just 10 yards on that straight drop back play action. So the Vikings actually played that pretty well. So, overall, I think there are some things that the Giants like to do, right? Like that straight drop back play action. They didn't run a single rollout in this game, which I thought was kind of interesting as well. But I might expect them to run from under center a little more just to balance out their previous tendencies. And I would say that I expect them to go ahead and do something different than just inside zone every single play every single run play and maybe do something a little bit different with that split zone. I don't know what's in their tool bag outside of inside zone and split zone, right? Because I saw them run literally 0 other run plays in this game, but it'll be kind of interesting to see how they change it up in the game against us.
Yeah, they're definitely capable of hitting you with a lot of different stuff. So, but yeah, like the scrape exchange, that's particularly, for the split zone, got to be able to be gap sound when guys are moving across scraping across the formation with those slice blocks. So, um, yeah, but that I feel like, is there anything else you want to cover at this Giants matchup, or do you want to just launch into score predictions?
No, let's launch into score predictions. I'll let you go first since you're the one who brought it up.
Um, I feel like it would be bad juju. I don't feel confident in this game just because of how much I respect I feel like Abel and Kafka are better offensive play callers and designers than Kevin O'Connell, and that's no shade to Kevin O'Connell. I just feel like I have a very high opinion of them and just what they've been able to do with a roster that's been very banged up, and that they desperately, this is probably a bottom 5 receiving core in the NFL, especially with all the injuries they've had. And they're still able to sort of generate really efficient offensive and a really efficient offensive attack that kind of exploits what other defenses do. And the Vikings have a lot of weak points to exploit. So I worry about that. At the same time, I feel like it'll be at home. That'll be a huge help to the defense. That'll give them an advantage in on third downs. It'll make things harder for the Giants to communicate, to get things off. And it'll help the offensive line on the other side because you won't see Thibodeau and friend Dexter Lawrence timing the snap quite as easily, because the Vikings can be a little bit better at it. So I feel like, especially in the trenches, which is kind of my biggest concern as well, that's advantage Viking. But I'll say all that combined. I also feel like one thing I'll say is I feel like Kevin O'Connell is saving some of the best stuff for the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he's been he's tried to keep things under wraps, and there are times when it felt very vanilla the way he runs the offense, but he also has a fair share of like the good stuff, the secret sauce, the trick plays, and I feel like we're going to see a fair amount of that special sauce come into this game as well. Hopefully that gives them a leg up as well. So I'll say I think it'll be high scoring just because I feel like I like the Vikings' chances to get the ball into their receivers against a blitz-heavy offense and the potential for that to lead to explosives. And I like the Giants' ability to prey on a Viking susceptibility to vertical routes, double moves, or just their propensity to allow big drives down the field because Saquon's really, really good, and because guys are able to just establish easy inside leverage and just keep spamming skinny posts all down the field. So all that to say, I feel like it'll be a higher scoring game, but I will take the Vikings with the betting line. Vikings are -3, and I'll say 27-24. A bit of a rematch of exactly what happened last time. I think
Yeah.
it'll come to it a different way, but I do think Vikings come out on top on this one as the favorite at home.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I want to say that no outcome from the Vikings would surprise me in this game. Like, I think that, the team in general on offense really has not put it all together in a single game this entire season. And I think we know they have the potential to put more together. So I wouldn't put that entirely off the table, but it hasn't happened 17 times. Maybe you could consider the first half of the Bears game that, but that happened the first half of the first Bears game, and it kind of fell apart in the second half, right? So I don't think that that's likely, but I do think the Vikings are a quality team, and they have more talent than the Giants do overall. One thing I didn't mention is the Vikings defensive line, and this is part of the reason the Giants runs weren't very successful, was dominating the Giants offensive line, right? Particularly Evan Neal really struggled in the game in both run blocking and pass protection. I don't think the interior of the Giants offensive line is all that good. Andrew Thomas is like an elite level left tackle, right? So I think we need to give him credit, but I think the rest of the line is kind of a weak point for the Giants, and I think the Vikings really did well against that offensive line. And I don't see a reason for that to change, right? Danielle Hunter, I think, is playing the best football of his season, in these last handful of games
He was
here.
destroying Riley Reef
Yeah.
all last, like, just Riley Reef had zero chance pretty much every
Yeah.
single snap. It was as a former Viking, I felt bad, but like he was not fast enough to get out there. Hunter was so explosive, and could run right past him or right through him. So Hunter's really coming into his own. So hopefully that's against Evan Neal. That's definitely an advantage Hunter too. So hopefully we see the same thing as that we did against the Bears.
Yeah, absolutely. And with saying that, I think the Vikings can at least match the level of pressure that the Giants might be able to get against the Vikings on their offensive line, right? With some of their issues or question marks or struggles there with backups in the game. So, with that being said, I think the Vikings' skill talent at the receiving, at the pass catching options is infinitely better than the Giants' skill talent. And I think that can ultimately win out in the game. Like you said, the Vikings have been playing close games all year. I don't necessarily expect that to change overall, right? I don't think they're going to put it together 100% for all 4 quarters. I think it'll be on defense, kind of another situation where it's a bend, don't break. We let up a ton of yards, like the 400 plus yards we let up in the Giants game, and maybe hold them to field goals because their red zone offense isn't all that competent and our red zone defense is pretty good. I think that's where in the condensed areas where the cracks in Daniel Jones' game maybe start to show through a little bit at this point in his career. So I'm going to go with a very similar, score prediction to you. I want to say 27-24, but you literally already just said that. Let's go 30-27. We get a few more points there.
Oh yeah, I can totally see it. I mean, it already happened just a few weeks ago, so I feel like it's funny. I feel like we could see a lot of the same thing because teams know what worked and can just spam that again. But also, it's like almost a divisional game because we just saw these guys. So, like divisional games, anything can happen. Things get weird when you're that familiar with each other. So, having this matchup this quick against each other, yeah, and especially with the Vikings this year and with the Giants, yeah, anything could happen. So, either way, will be fun to have a playoff game at home in Minnesota. So,
yeah. It's going to be fun to watch. I mean, I think if you looked back at the beginning of the year, we would not have expected this team to be 13-4 and winning the division, right? We thought they were a fringe playoff team, maybe a wild card team if things went well. I mean, I thought maybe we thought they had a decent ceiling, but I don't think anybody would have predicted, being the number 3 seed and being 13-4, right? It's not just like a 3 seed that's kind of questionable, just barely won the division. We dominated the NFC North, and whether or not we're frauds in terms of that domination, in terms of our record, we still did it. We got to that record, and I think Kevin O'Connell deserves a lot of credit for that. And I think this was a good outcome to the Vikings season, regardless of the outcome of the Giants game, and fans should be happy with it, right? So with all of that being said, I think we're going to wrap up for the day. I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. He is Nick Olson. You can find him at Nick Olson NFL. Our co-host Greg is at You've Been Gregged. We are Kindred Skulls. You can find us at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And Skull Vikings.
Skull. Playoff Skull. Goal, baby.
The first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score the